Hello, my name is Hannah Finch. I am a second-year law student at Penn State Law, and I am currently participating in the Manglona Lab for Gender and Economic Equity. One of the lab's projects, Witnesses to Her Story, is currently concentrated on capturing the personal experiences of women in sports, education, and the workforce, focusing on the 1960s and 70s. Today, I have the privilege of interviewing esteemed champion of women's rights, former Senator and House of Representatives member, Barbara Mikulski. Welcome, former Senator Mikulski. So to start, you were born in 1936 and raised in Baltimore, Maryland. Who lived at home with you growing up?
Well, I grew up as kind of like a depression kid. The country was coming out, so Dad had a small business. We were FDR Democrats, and the neighborhoods in Baltimore at that time were like urban villages. We lived in enclaves usually related to our identity, like Little Italy, Polish Hill, Hebrew Village, and however, Baltimore also had the another side, which was segregation. Baltimore was a deeply segregated town. So growing up, I lived in like a community where everybody lived, worked, and shopped in the same neighborhood. There were close ties, and neighbor was devoted neighbor to helping neighbor.
Oh, so it sounds like you grew up in a pretty close-knit community and knew most of your neighbors and the people around you.
Absolutely.
And what did your parents do for work?
My mother and father owned a small neighborhood grocery store, and right across the street from where we lived. Dad ran the business, and when he would get busy during the day, mother would run over and help him out. We didn't have marketing words like surge capacity. It was, I'm going to help your dad. um, and the store really was not only sold food, but it was tied to the community. We knew our neighbors. Dad prided in trying to help the community. We were not politically involved. My father was involved with the church, the organizations there, charity through the church. I went to a Catholic school and was taught by the nuns. Again, neighbor helping neighbor. And so when, like, we were an industrial town, the people in the community worked like at Bethlehem Steel, General Motors, down on the shipyards. So we knew when times were good and when times were bad. And if times were bad, my father would extend credit to people because his view was nobody should ever go hungry in the United States of America. So you see, I grew up with this ethic of connected to the community, always being interested in other people. And if anybody was having a hard time, lend a helping hand.
How did your parents divide like household responsibilities between themselves?
Well, my father worked a 6 day, 12-hour day. So my father worked 72 hours a week. So we weren't into kind of the new femdem stuff of the 70s and so on. The roles and mother kept the household going. And his dad said she was the CFO, the chief family officer.
I like that. And did you and your sisters have any responsibilities or chores around the house growing up?
Well, my sisters and I'm the oldest, and I have all the characteristics of the oldest. Get out there, break new ground, be fearless,
Oh yeah,
and a little mouthy,
that
and
take
so
charge
on.
energy.
But yes, because we helped our mother with just the usual activities of daily living of keeping the household going.
Gotcha. And you had previously spoken in another interview about how you were babysat often by your great grandmother, Eleanor Keurig. She was a Polish immigrant who had left Poland at 16 years of age for an arranged marriage. How did this influence you growing up?
Well, my great grandmother came from Poland in about 1886 and came to Fells Point. Her brother had come before to make sure that the promise of America was a reality at the time, that it was a good place to come, that it was a safe place to come. And her brother connected immediately to the Catholic Church in the Polish community that was bilingual. And when we talk about the arranged marriage, he found some guys that would be eligible for my grandmother when she came if she wanted to, but nothing was ever forced. I'm going to be very clear about that. This was uh, these my grandmother came with little money in her pocket but big dreams in her heart and really wanted to become American. So took all the English and citizenship classes that were offered in the community. There was like a settlement house called the Polish Home that they would go to for dances and lessons on citizenship to take tests. And then she would go to Broadway Market, which was like the almost like a they had them in cities. There would be considered like sheds with a farmers market style, but that's where she would learn, practice her English. She would read the newspaper. Grandmother was literate. She had gone to school in Europe, and she practiced her English. She practiced money. She practiced everything. So she was great. And during the war, because I was a child that was kind of in elementary school during World War II, mother was putting in long hours because the men in our community were fighting the war. So we lived in a community where we had the Rosie the Riveters. Women did shift work. Dad would often open the store for someone who was coming home late at work, etc. And so there were times when it was better for me to spend maybe overnight with my grandmother and so on. So I could learn to speak uh, Polish by the time I was like 9 years old. I could say my prayers in Polish. I learned the difference between vodka and vodka. Vodka in Polish is water. Vodka is, well, it's a shooter, you know that. So we were very clear that my pronunciation was correct. Barbara, Barbara, never ask for vodka. It's Voda.
Sounds like a
So,
great time.
well,
And
I learned the ways of Europe. We were fiercely Democrat. We were fiercely, of course, behind the war effort. And Dad did everything he could to run the business and help the other businesses keep going. My father was already had two children when the war became, so he was not drafted, um, and helped the other businesses in the family go. We had another grocery store and we had a grandmother ran a bakery. We ran the best Polish bakery. I want to tell you a story about the bakery. My grandmother, again, it was neighbor helping neighbor. Um, when and we she had great breads, great donuts, great food, and a couple of my uncles had worked there. So, but when I was running for the Baltimore City Council and I was challenging the political bosses, I was challenging the machines. I was like, Miss Reformer, go get them, be a reformer and a transformer. So I'm out knocking on doors of the famous Baltimore neighborhoods with the white steps. I'm sure you've seen the pictures of what our wonderful communities look like. And a woman came to the door and she said, Mikulski, and I had little literature I was giving out. She said, Mikulski, Mikulski, are you with the political machine? And I said, no, I'm actually challenging them. I'm bringing something new and different, and I'm going to stop this highway from coming through that could take your neighborhood. She said, I don't know about politics, but I know about your grandmother's jelly donuts. If you're half as good as your grandmother's jelly donuts, you'll be okay. I'm going to give you a vote. And I came back to my headquarters and I said, I will now devote my life to being half as good as my grandmother's jelly donuts. But you see how it was loved and so on. When grandmother passed away and people came to, express their mourning condolences, um, their sympathy condolences, uh, men told me how she would let them during the Depression come into the bakery, and we had the big warm ovens that our uncles were baking bread and stuff, and let them like sleep there. she would give them, bread and milk and honey to maybe start their day. We couldn't feed the neighborhood, but she looked out for some of the men. People loved my grandmother as they did my mother and father, because again, we were not in the food business. We were in the community business, and again, that's where the strong ethic of service and really listening to the people. My dad always said, listen to the customer. They'll tell you what they want and they'll tell you what they need. It's not what you want or you think they should have. And all through my political life, I truly believe the best ideas come from the people and listening to the people. That's why, as a United States Senator, Congresswoman, I loved roundtables. I love getting together with people like from the PTAs or the Nurses Association.
We'll definitely touch on your wonderful political career in just a little bit, but I do want to talk a little bit more about the community influence. So it seems like you had a lot of people rallying around you. Were there any other strong female role models or mentors that helped influence you growing up?
Well, in this community, there were a lot of strong female role models. First of all, in my family, women helped with the business. Women helped run the business. Grandmother started this bakery. Um, my own mother, my aunts. So these were women who were unabashed about being involved. But then there were also the nuns that taught me. I was educated by the School Sisters of Notre Dame in elementary school and high school. Went to the same high school as Nancy Pelosi, and also nuns in college. And this is where I was met women who had master's degrees and had PhDs and who taught me wonderful subjects. And also, guess what? I'm only 4'11", and so I wasn't exactly the biggest jock in the school. I was the most enthusiastic with sports, but I excelled in the drama club and the debating team. And that's where, like, sister would say, Barbara, get out there and debate those Jesuit boys. You're twice as good and twice as smart. Show up, stand up, and speak up. And I've been doing it all my life.
I'd like to touch a little bit more on your elementary education. So you started elementary school in what year?
I guess about 1942.
And while you were at elementary school, did you have any kind of uniform or dress code?
We all wore uniforms, like little plaid outfits and uh, brown tie-up shoes. I wore uniforms in elementary school and in high school. And actually, they were very good because, and I know as I got to be a teenager, I wanted to express my identity and, have girly girl things and all that. But we had both in our elementary school and then in our high school a wide range of economic participation. So there were girls like in my high school that were the daughter of a judge, the daughter of a doctor or a lawyer. They could afford cashmere sweaters and so on. But we also had girls that were there on scholarships, some that had escaped actually the war, that had been able to come into America before the fascists took over and the Nazis. And so by wearing a uniform, it wasn't what you could afford to buy, it's what you strived to be. So the emphasis was on yourself and being a good student and a good participant in the extracurricular activities. So the uniform was actually a very good way of dealing with economic diversity, where no one felt embarrassed or humiliated because they couldn't afford the latest and the greatest.
And was this like a school regulated kind of dress code, or was this just like
Yes,
a kind
no,
of
it was always school
community?
regulated. Yes.
And what did your dress code kind of look like? What kind of clothes did you guys have to wear?
Well, in high school, we wore like a navy blue jumper and a tan blouse, knee-high socks, um, and either tie-up shoes, uh, like tie-up shoes or sandals, And that was it.
And were you guys allowed to wear pants?
Pants didn't come until the 70s. We're talking about the 40s
Yes, so you were
and the
only
50s.
allowed to wear like dresses or skirts and things like that.
It wasn't what we were allowed to do or not. It's just that they weren't there. They weren't
And,
part of the fashion range at the time. The uniforms of these schools now have changed. Girls wear skirts or slacks.
and which classes did you enjoy most while you were at school?
I enjoyed history and literature. I love stories. I love the stories about what was going on in the world. I love literature. I often say that there were three important cards in my life. My first card was when I got my library card, and I could go to the library and check out books on my own and have a new friend in Switzerland called Heidi and would ride horseback with my friend Flicker. And, the library was like a gateway to the world, my library card. The next important card was when I got my driver's license. Oh, was I ready to go? Metal on the pedal, ready to go. And then my voter's card. When I could get my voter's card and participate, what I felt was in a wider world, was just fantastic. The three important cards that I felt were part of emancipation and growing up was my library card, gateway to the world, driver's license, which gave me more autonomy, which I loved, and then of course the voter's card, where I was in citizenship. We grew up, as I said, during wartime, both World War II, quickly followed by the Korean War, often the forgotten war. And so we were fiercely patriotic.
And while you were at school, did you see any differences between what were required classes for boys versus girls?
In elementary school, it was co ed, but in high school and college, I went to all women's schools. That was a whole other thing. I was continually in high school and in college surrounded by classmates who were other girls. And the teachers that we had, though, in high school were all women, all Catholic nuns. In college, there were nuns, there were people, lay people with PhDs, men and women. So I didn't go to school with boys until two things. One, I failed geometry, and I also failed sewing. Okay. We had to take sewing, and so I went to summer school and passed geometry. But it wasn't until graduate school at the University of Maryland School of Social Work, where I went to get my master's degree in social work, that I was actually had like real classmates that were then men. So it was so I grew up in an atmosphere again where the men were wonderful in our family. They ran businesses. My father really insisted that girls get an education. He was ahead of his time, but he wanted my sisters and I to be able to be independent and always take care of ourselves. And
what did you see other women in the community doing at that time for work?
they would finish high school and they would either go to work in the factories or they would go into clerical positions.
And
we were a blue collar neighborhood, so there were very few girls that went to college out of those neighborhoods. Then, so I was in a more of a blue collar industrial neighborhood that was very working class, and people worked in factories. Women worked in clerical and stenographic positions. In other neighborhoods, the women went into teaching and into nursing.
and
So this
when,
is before Betty Friedan. This is before Gloria Steinem. This is before, the women's movement. The women's movement really did not get underway until the 70s.
yeah, and while you were at the Institute of Notre Dame, when did you begin that level of education? Like what year did that start?
I was at the Institute of Notre Dame from 1950 to 1954. I was at Mount St. Agnes College from 1954 to 1958. Then I went to work as a social worker at Catholic Charities in child welfare. And then I wanted to do what I could to prevent family breakup. And I went to work in protective services at the Department of Social Services. And that's where I became a social worker that was working in child abuse prevention and even some rescue work with children from highly abusive environments. And then decided to go get a master's degree. But because I saw the Spartan services that are available for the poor to help, everybody was telling the poor to help themselves, but there were no services there. And I wanted to be an advocate. And I wanted to be an advocate for the services. So then I went to the University of Maryland School of Social Work because I knew in order to have an influence in the field of social work, I had to get my master's degree. Went to the University of Maryland, majored in a field called community organization or social strategy, which taught me how to organize people for self-help. Loved it, learned so much, and would recommend it as a wonderful career choice to pursue that for anybody, men and women. So that's my story.
And what did you see your friends doing after high school? Were they also going into the professional world, or were they going through similar kind of track?
I graduated from the Institute of Notre Dame. I was in what they call college prep. So many of my friends and all went to colleges. My father had, we had a terrible setback in our family. My father's grocery store had a fire, and my father lost his business and had to rebuild. And my father and mother told me I could go to college, but there wasn't the resources to go away to college. So I became what they called a day hop, which meant, but we had two wonderful women's colleges here. I wanted to continue in this trajectory of being taught by the nuns. I mean, they were so great. They were so smart. They were so well educated, and they kept motivating us. You're going to be a leader. You're going to have an education. You're going to be a leader in your home. You're going to be a leader in the community. Stand up, show up, speak up. And so I went to Mount St. Agnes College. But along the way, when I was about 9 years old, my family, of course, wanted me to know my Polish heritage. And it was in the midst of the war. They wanted me to, Poland was occupied by the Nazis. And I went to see the movie Madame Curie that won all kinds of Academy Awards. And when I left that movie, I wanted to go into chemistry and ask my mother and father at age 9-ish if I could have a chemistry set. And I loved it. I loved science, and I loved everything about science and what it could mean to the world, like saving lives and new inventions that could really make a difference in the world. And so I started college thinking about maybe I'm going to be a doctor or maybe go into medical technology, work more in the lab. But boy, was I klutzy in science. I kept breaking things in the lab. I had good eyesight to read and drive or whatever, but looking in that little microscope, dud, dud, dud. And finally, the dean, Sister Xavier, said, "We want to talk to you. We think that you are very good in social sciences, but you're not very good in the physical sciences. You struggle all the time just to be able to do it. You don't have good coordination. But you would be just a natural, and you should think about this. Go home and talk with your mother and father about this." So I talked and I thought about it, and they said, you might make a very good social worker. They were the ones that gave me the idea.
Wow.
And that I was very good. They said, you were just excellent in sociology. You're an excellent in psychology. You're an excellent in when we take in, any of the social sciences. You just excel. But when you're there looking into that microscope, fizz, fizz, flop, flop. So I went home and talked to my mother and father, and they said, well, will you be able to get a job? The whole idea is that you can take care of yourself. And I said, the harder the economy, the more people need social workers. And there are jobs in both government and Catholic charities. They said, okay, if the sisters recommend it, and this is where we think you should go ahead. So I switched my major and I just took off. That's when I made the dean's list. That's when I made the honor societies. I just loved the field. I just couldn't read enough, study enough, absorb enough to know what to do. And then when I graduated, as I said, I went to work for Catholic Charities, then Department of Social Services, then a master's degree, then the poverty program, then the highway fight.
And I definitely want to dive deeper into each of those portions of your life. But first, I want to talk a little bit more about your time in high school and elementary and middle school education levels. While you were in high school or middle school, did they ever talk to you about women's health or sex education or menstruation?
Just normally, this was really, though, left to the home.
Okay, so they didn't really instruct you in class on it.
No.
Okay. And when you were at home, what did your parents tell you about those topics?
Well, my father didn't talk to me about it at all.
So it was left up to your mother.
Well, how many fathers do you know tell their girls about sex education?
So it wasn't a topic that was really open in the home, was it?
It was like considered a normal thing. This was not a big deal. Don't get the revolutions mixed up. So remember, first of all, we didn't talk about junior high school. In Catholic school, you were in elementary school or you were high school. You were either K through 8th grade, and then you went to high school. Okay, so there was no middle school. And then in high school, we knew about our bodies. We had, and then the gym teachers were usually lay women. And so, we had little pamphlets and discussion, but this was before the pill. This was Catholic. You were not supposed to have sex until you were married. And in terms of the normal functions of your body, I remember talking with my mom. She talked to me about being a young woman, being a girl, what a woman means, and so on. Then she had a little pamphlet. I believe it was put out by the Kotex people at that time. Tampons weren't around. Remember, this is the 50s, 50, 19 in front of it.
Yeah. And so if it wasn't, as prevalent, how did you know what products to purchase or where to
That's
go?
what you discuss with your mother.
And you didn't see like any advertisements at the time, nothing in the media, anything like that?
It was not something that I was focusing on. I was focusing on being, in school and games and extracurricular activities and Girl Scouts and things like that. Being really open about talking about women and our bodies was really the revolutionary book called Our Body and Ourselves that was published in Boston by, I think, a women's collective of women who'd been active in public health and whatever. And it was really among early bird women's movement people, it was really out there. And it became a great book that people could use in their families and to be able to talk about it among themselves. Women formed clubs and discussions to talk about these things. So it was all part of the revolution, which was not only to claim your power, but to claim your own body. And that these processes were the natural processes of their life. They were not, you didn't feel like you should hide about it. You shouldn't feel ashamed about it. You shouldn't, so the shouldn'ts weren't taboos. it would be to claim this because this is natural, this is good, this is where it is. And that was the spirit of the time as we went through the transition of the 60s and the early 70s.
You began attending St. Agnes College in what year?
I attended from 1954 to 1958.
Did you have different kind of restrictions for like what you could wear to campus or
No. Well, I got my master's in social work and was actually in the inaugural class at the University of Maryland School of Social Work. And I would say at that time, it was 2/3 female, 1/3 guys.
Okay. When you were receiving your master's degree in social work in 1965, did you have administrators who were more men or women, or was there more of an even split between the faculty?
At the University of Maryland School of Social Work, I would say the faculty at that time was about half and half. And but it was interesting in terms of what they taught. So, like often the clinical counseling classes were taught by women, but things like the administrative courses, research classes, and so on, in my field, which was community organization or social strategy, were men. And one, of course, my great teacher and mentor, Dr. Dan Thurs, who was really transformational and encouraging me, teaching me, and really the field.
Why do you think that more men held those roles?
I think that's, again, the way the world was. There were certain presumptions that somehow or another men at that time were better administrators. I also thought that they saw themselves as though I can't answer that.
And when you were getting ready for college or anything like that, did you apply for a credit card or anything like that?
There were no credit cards.
Oh, okay. When you were trying
Credit
to buy
cards didn't come in again until the 70s, when we really had a society that was focused on turning us into mass consumers rather than citizens.
And do you remember getting your first credit card?
Yeah.
And did you have to have like a cosigner, or was it just yourself?
I did not need a cosigner, but and I didn't get a credit card until after I'd gotten out of graduate school. One, because I didn't want the debt. We were in a family where we were raised not to incur debt, and that your identity did not come from consumption. It came from your character. It's not what you owned, but what you owned up to.
Yeah. And
so I came from a family of really where honesty and integrity was very important of the family ethic in terms of the way mom and dad did their business. They were so loved and regarded. Everything was above board. My father during the war would not even look at anything related to the black market. He referred to that as blood money, that we were going to support our boys. So character was a very important thing. It wasn't like, did you have the latest? Did you have the trendy? So
it's easy to see why you went into
when
social work.
I went to the Congress in 1976, and we formed the Congresswomen's Caucus as an advocacy group within the institution, credit was one of and access to credit was one of our biggest issues because of the need for co-signers for, at that time, credit cards had come in, for mortgages and so on. And often in families, in some instances, the women were making more than the men. Particularly in communities of color, that the women had perhaps had a chance to go to high school or even college and were teachers, but perhaps the man that they married might be a bus driver for the public school system, and was not earning as much as his wife, though both worked in the school system for different jobs. So, yeah, I mean, that
And
was
how did
one of
it
the big
feel
issues. And that's why we went to the ERA, though, because we could not keep fighting this one law at a time. Credit here, the ability, the issues that were there.
And how did it feel to form that women's law caucus? Did you feel you were empowered? Did you feel like there were a lot of adversity towards creating that?
I loved it. And there was such a sense of camaraderie, and it was bipartisan. It was a day before the Gingrich-Trump rules of demonizing people or trivializing their ideas, that if you don't have a better idea, you trivialize the person who has them. We were bipartisan. I often said the best ship of state is to sail on the good ship bipartisanship. And we teamed up, and we focused really on the economics of being a woman, the way being a mother was penalized in the Social Security system. So we say we value motherhood, but when you step out of the labor market then to maybe have your children, you're not paying into Social Security, so your pension's going to be less. We got into the equal pay for equal work issue. Oh my gosh. And a lot of these things are also chronicled in the issues that the beloved Justice Ruth Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor fought and were advocates in. But there was a great sense of camaraderie. We had our specific laws, and we felt we were moving ahead. We felt that we were really, opening up doors of opportunity. And then the best ideas came from the people, because we were a group, advocacy groups wanted to meet with us. So advocacy groups were being formed. And so that's where we met women who were victims of domestic violence, which was a dirty little secret that was buried in homes and never included in police records or whatever. Oh, he was just drunk. He didn't mean anything. Okay. So that's when we took up those issues, the violence against women, for which, by the way, we had very good men as our allies. When I was in the Senate, then President Biden was then Senator Joe Biden, and he helped create the Violence Against Women Act. So men of quality always stood with we women as we fought for our equality. Not everyone did. There were many oppositions, some pretty mean and some pretty sarcastic, or tried to sabotage us or throw sand in our legislative gears. But like we learned, show up, stand up, speak up, and don't ever give up.
So you said that they would put sand in your legislative gears. Could you provide me like an example of sometimes when that would have
Sand
happened?
in legislative gears is to say, well, let's have another hearing. In other words, they wouldn't say, we oppose you and we're going to make sure your bill never sees the light of day for a vote on the House floor. So they would invent procedural reasons. They would inconveniently forget to schedule the meeting because they were the chairman or something like that. Just things that would slow things down as we were trying to make our headway. And of course, we women always work through the regular order and the regular process. And we had great people. And interestingly, many of the congresswomen who left voluntarily, they retired or so, and ultimately presidents appointed them as the ambassadors. One very distinguished Republican woman was Congresswoman Peggy Heckler of Massachusetts, of blessed memory, and she went on to be our ambassador to Ireland. Congresswoman Lindy Boggs of New Orleans went on to be our ambassador to the Vatican. And of course, Now in contemporary politics, um, Nikki Haley was a congresswoman, a governor, and then, of course, our ambassador to the United Nations. It seems that our interpersonal skills, willingness to work through the process, but solve conflict, better to talk than to shoot if you can, and resolve the conflict. The women have moved in. Oh, Connie Morello, my very dear friend from Maryland, who was my ally on women's health, was a wonderful congresswoman, and then went on to be our ambassador, I believe, to UNESCO. And she's very available and loves to talk to students. And she's just a fantastic person. And she'll talk about our bipartisanship and how you get things done.
So when you guys were making the Congresswomen's Caucus, how did that idea come about? Were you guys discussing it amongst yourselves? Like, what made you ultimately decide to make that group?
Well, really, I would say that it was the brainchild of two wonderful women, Congresswoman Liz Holtzman of New York, and Congresswoman Pat Schroeder of Colorado, led the way, and we're talking about it. They reached out to members of our own party, and at that time, we also had a substantial number of women of color who had been elected to Congress. The beloved Shirley Chisholm, Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, Yvonne Brayworth Burke. So we were a feisty reformer group to begin with. Schroeder and Holtzman said maybe we should just get together and see how we could be a force together. And of course, we said, and after we met, we said it has to be bipartisan, and reached out then to people like Peggy Heckler and other Republican women. And we differed on issues like choice, term limits, balanced budget. But we did agree on many of the issues facing the economics of being a woman and the health issues of being a woman. And that also went over when I worked with Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson of Texas to establish the Women of the Senate dinners.
Yes. So taking a few steps back, in 1971, you successfully ran for
Baltimore
the
City
City
Council.
Council. How was it taking that first step? How did it feel to take that first step into such a male-dominated field?
Fantastic. Fantastic. Because, it wasn't what I wanted to do. It's what the voters empowered me to do. So the ideas that I was advocating, the causes that I wanted to champion, the changes I wanted to bring were validated by the voters. I became one of the largest vote getters. So it wasn't like me and my ideas. It wasn't an ego trip. It wasn't a vanity license plate bumper sticker or something. It was go for it. We're counting on you. And I was so awestruck by that. When people vote for you, they're by giving you their vote, they're also, and that empowers you to be their advocate, but it also says we trust you. And I took that so seriously. And and again, when I came to the city council, it was often run by some of the political bosses, mostly men. But again, there were men on the council who were my allies, and I learned different things from different men. And there were surprises. We were a one-party system. All the council members were Democrats, but some were more fiscally conservative than others. And so, of course, I immediately was clustering with the liberal guys, and there were two women of color who were on the council, and met with them and was taking advice from them. But there was a councilman by the name of Councilman Reuben Kaplan, by profession an accountant. And he was a real fiscal conservative, but a wonderful human being. And I went to him and said, Mr. Kaplan, Councilman, I'm not sure that when I read the budget, I really know how to read a budget because it's the columns and figures. I'm a narrative person, not a number in a column person. I don't, are there any tips you could give me? He and I became the bestie of friends because he was more than willing to help guide me um, to what to look for and how to read it. I would sit next to him and I'd ask some questions and so on. And he was like a fiscal uncle to me. It was a wonderful relationship. And then he would point out to me what he thought was excessive spending. And I would always say, I'll take a look at it. Or he would say, we can't sustain this, Barb, Councilwoman, and so on. But I will tell you, since this is a gender clash,
In 19
I was in a hearing with my colleagues, and the chairman of this particular committee was very old school and quite rigid in the way he conducted himself, unlike Mr. Kaplan, who was so cordial and helpful to me, and to others. So the chairman kept calling me Councilman Mikulski. And I said, sir, Councilwoman, please. So we did this 3 times. Councilman, please call me Councilwoman. So finally he said to me, it doesn't matter, Councilman. I said, well, if it doesn't matter, I'm going to call you Councilwoman.
How did
So
that
I called
feel
him.
to have to
Well,
kind
let
of
me tell you,
argue with
the
him?
room went quiet because this was pretty pugnacious of a response. So he said, yes. You know, he stopped calling me by name. He would point to me and say, yes, to like my turn to ask a question. You know how hearings are conducted. So I would say, well, Councilwoman, I won't say his name. And he said, don't call me that. So he said it didn't matter. It doesn't matter to you. It doesn't matter to me. You call me Councilman, and I'll call you Councilwoman. Doesn't matter.
And when this happened, did you talk with anybody about it? And
No, I just did it. You don't sit around and say, may I have permission? Can we act as a group? Can we network and share? Sometimes you just gotta do it.
well, more so, did you express how
I
you
claimed
felt
my
having
power,
been
and
addressed
I
like
was mad as hell, and I wasn't gonna take it. And
yeah,
so I took him at his word. The
yeah, and
council, but I will tell you, he adjourned the meeting, but after that, everybody called me Councilwoman. Through that high school I went to, show up, stand up, speak up, I was taught to claim in my debating team experience, the ethos of we were leaders, and so I was taught to claim my power.
and you were also the first woman elected in her own right, as opposed to inheriting the seat through death or absence of a male family member, when you successfully ran for Senate in 1986. How did that feel?
That was really so awesome. The day that I walked on the Senate floor to take my oath to the Constitution, um, I knew that I was going where very few women had gone before, and that my step forward would be, in its own way, historic. There was only one other woman in the Senate at the time, Senator Nancy Casselbaum of Kansas, a wonderful senator, and she became a very good friend. She was a wonderful advisor and somewhat of a bit of a coach to me getting started. The rules of the Senate are quite complicated, and she was a helping voice in hand. But when I stepped on that floor, I knew that was history, and I was really overcome with just the emotion of it all, and the and what it took not only for me to get there, but what it took for others. And that's when I said, and this is true of a lot of us who are firsties, because I've talked to a lot of people who were the first, like Sally Ride, the astronaut, our justices, Sandra Day O'Connor, Justice Ruth Ginsburg, we all wanted to be the first of many and to create a pipeline and to do what we could to remove barriers for other women. So if you were talking to Condoleezza Rice, it goes again, political party didn't matter. So if you talk like with Madeleine Albright and Condoleezza Rice, both extraordinary secretaries of state, they were firsties, but they wanted to be the first of many and encourage women to go into foreign policy. That foreign policy wasn't like a guy's job and domestic policy or a girl's job. So that helping the world to be safer was our job. And to help America be stronger and safer and smarter was also our job.
And did you celebrate that moment with anyone in particular?
Well, oh, sure. We celebrated it with my family. We had celebrated their election night. I mean, really, election night was a big night. And then there were buses that had come from Baltimore, and I had rented a room in the Capitol, and we had a big party and hoorah. And, so yes, we had banners and people wore my campaign buttons. And oh, yes, it was very festive. And I was certainly welcomed particularly by the other Democrats. One of the first to shake my hand was Senator Ted Kennedy, Senator Chris Dodd of Connecticut. And you know who else was very helpful to me? Well, in the early days of the Senate, of course, was my colleague from Maryland, Senator Paul Sarbanes, who really was a great friend and a great ally, and showed me not only helping learn the regular order of the Senate, but there are little invisible hallways of power that are just how you get things done. They're all legal, etc., but how you do this, how you work this before the meeting, how you whatever. And he was a great teacher, a great coach, and a great icebreaker for me, because the guys didn't really know what I was going to be. Was I going to be a bomb blaster in bell bottoms? We wore bell bottoms at the time, and so on. And then the other group was the World War II veterans. These were on both sides of the aisle. And I'm going to do shout outs for Senator Dan Inouye, who from Hawaii, Senator Bob Dole from Kansas. The Kansas senators, Senator Dole and Senator Castlebaum, were really tremendously helpful. So, but the World War II men seem to have faced so much adversity that they just wanted our country to be the best that it could be, and they did all they could to help me. Senator Inouye lost his arm at Monte Cassino, was a Congressional Medal of Honor winner. Members of his own family had been in a Japanese internment camp while he was fighting for America. But when he came back, he wasn't bitter. He worked to make the world better and would help bring Hawaii into statehood.
It sounds like you were surrounded by some very impressive people.
Well, I was with very impressive people, but who kind of welcomed me. And then there were the other Democrats that helped me. I don't mean they were the only one. Senator Bob Berg, all of these, they were quite helpful. The women couldn't wear socks on the Senate floor. And this was the era of the pantsuit. We were all wearing pantsuits.
You were one of two women who were sworn into the Senate, the other being Nancy Kasbaum. You both later participated in the pantsuit rebellion of 1990.
Well, I was the leader of that. I was the unabashed leader of that. So,
yeah, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So, the Senate had this kind of dress code, and women were not supposed to wear trousers. They didn't use the word pants, they said trousers. And I couldn't understand why. So I talked to Senator Paul Sarbanes, said, what do you think? He said, if you're going to wear slacks, You've got to tell Bob Berg. No surprises. He's the stickler. He's the enforcer. So, and I discussed this with Senator Kennedy. He said, oh, God, another revolution. He thought it was great. He said, let me know the day. I'm going to be there to support you. Senator Dodd as well. They were like my pals on tough days. They always had a kind word or a joke or something. So I went to the Senate historian. Well, this had evolved, but yes, it was there, but there was no actual rule per se. I went to the Senate parliamentarian. So if I came out, could I be gavelled out of order and ordered to leave the chamber? Because I didn't want to be embarrassed, and I didn't want to embarrass anybody. So being ordered out of the chamber is not a good thing. So I got all my I's dotted and T's. So I went to Senator Byrd and said, Senator, it's often very cold and drafty here. And also I come in from my Mondays in Maryland. I've toured military bases where I've had to climb in vehicles. And quite frankly, it's more ladylike to wear slacks when I'm getting in and out of these vehicles or doing these things in the community, climbing up here, going down there. It's safer and more dignified. He said, well, all right. I'm not sure. Did you talk with? Yes. So we were working on a Saturday morning, and it was so cold and rainy. And I went and I thought, today's the day. So, and this is before iPhones and we had cell phones. So I called my staff and I said, I'm wearing slacks today. Tell Kennedy, tell Don, please alert Senator Byrd. So they gavelled the order. We pledged, we pray, we pledge to allegiance. The chair sits down to open. The Senate will come to order. And then I opened the door, stepped on the Senate floor. Nice Jones of New York slacks, my St. John's knit jacket. I mean, I was really very properly dressed. Stepped on, walked over to my desk and sat down. Quiet. Any objections to the proceedings? No objection. Senate will proceed. And I took one small step for womankind that day. So that's the story behind it. And then after that, we wore them and so on. It became usual and customary.
And you said that there was like an enforcer. So what would have happened if, they hadn't been supportive? What kind of repercussions could you have faced?
Well, first of all, they could have enforced a code, the way they've talked to Senator Fetterman and some other people. But you do want to be dignified. It is the United States Senate. So my attire was very dignified and was in keeping with what women were wearing to law firms and to corporate offices. So I wasn't outside of the mainstream of what was happening with women professional attire. So I was very professional. I was just in a different century.
We've talked about a lot today, and in light of all your experiences, what makes you most proud of your younger self?
My younger self? That I participated. Even as a little girl, I participated in what was going on. And I participated not only by joining the library club, but the Girl Scouts. I love being a Girl Scout and working on badges. And during the war, I was part of the recycling effort that we started. We collected certain things for recycling, and my dad, who had like a larger warehouse type thing, said that we could deposit there for weekly pickup. So, every Wednesday after school, we would wear our little Girl Scout uniforms and go through the neighborhood with a wagon to pick up things that we were newspapers and all, to recycle. And again, I participated because I wanted to help win the war. I wanted to help my uncles, just like my father was trying to keep things going, and my father and my mother, we were all trying to help America, beat fascism and support our troops. So I participated from the time I was 9 years old, and I'll keep on participating until the day I die. Because as Justice Holmes said, you have to be part of the actions and passions of your time and to participate. That is the goal and the test of citizenship.